Hello there, colorful creators. Welcome back to our channel where we make art at home easy. Today we are going to making this beautiful watercolor leaf resistance painting. For your supplies, you will need some watercolor paper, a cup of water, a paint tray or a paper plate will work, some watercolor paints, and then you will also need some paint brushes. I have 3 different sizes here, a large, medium, and small, and then I have some napkins as well. You will also need a pencil and some painter's tape. To start, we're going to be using our painter's tape to tape down our piece of paper onto our table or painting surface. This is a really great way to keep your paper nice and flat as we are creating. Whenever you are working with watercolor, your paper can tend to bubble or ripple up, so taping it down to your surface is really nice. I also like taping about a 1/2 of an inch inside of the paper to give a nice white crisp border around my paper as well. Now, once that is all secure and smoothed down, you're going to start by getting your watercolor paints, and I'm going to be working with some light yellows, and I have some light oranges in there as well, and I'm just going to be washing that over the background, and it's going to be just a very simple wash of color on the background of the paper. There is no specific way of distributing the color. All that we want to do is just to apply a thin layer of the watercolor paints to the background of the paper. You'll want to make sure that you have the entire surface of the paper completely covered with that light wash of color, and then once it is completely covered with the watercolor paint, you will wait for it to dry. Now you can either wait and let it air dry, or you can do like me and you can grab a hair dryer and you can kind of speed up that process and let it dry a little bit faster by doing a hair dryer over top of it. Once your paper is completely dry for that layer of paint, go ahead and pick up your pencil, and we are going to begin to sketch in some leaves for our background here. And I'm doing kind of like a vine leaf on my background for the leaves. Now you can do whatever type of leaf that you want. If you want to do maple leaves, if you want to do a variety of leaves, it's totally up to you. This is just a style of leaves that I am doing, and I'm doing kind of 3 different bunches for this layer of the leaves. So once you have about 3 or 4 different leaves sketched in, go ahead and grab your watercolor paints again, and we're just going to be covering around all of our leaves. So we are not going to be painting the inside of our leaves that we just drew. We are going to be painting everywhere around it and on the outside of it. Now for this layer as well, you will notice that I am using a little bit darker paint. So I'm using a darker yellow and a darker orange as I am painting around all of my leaves. And we are doing this because we are wanting to layer up our color so that way it's darker within each layer. So every time we will do a layer of paint, it's going to be a little bit darker, and that's going to give us that layered and resistance and that negative effect of our leaves to help carve out the shape. And you'll want to just work around your entire picture until you have all of the areas where your leaves are not. So again, you'll want to remember that you want to add that layer of paint everywhere you did not draw your leaves. So we are shaping those out by going along the outside of the leaves instead of coloring the inside of the leaves. So paint everywhere along the outside of your leaves that you have drawn. Now I'm currently working with my bigger brush, but I am going to switch to my smaller one just so I can get into a little bit more of those smaller areas and get a little bit more of that detail. So it's totally up to you as far as the shape of your leaf and the size that you're working with as well. That will determine the size of the brush that you're working with. So your brushes are tools, so you want to make sure that you're picking a size of a brush and the shape of a brush that's going to serve you and going to be the right tool for the thing that you are painting and the picture that you are working on. Now, as you can see, we already have those 3 leaf stems beginning to take shape. And again, we didn't color in the leaves, we are going around the outside of the leaves. And that is going to be a negative painting effect because it is a negative space. We are utilizing negative space, meaning that there is no color or no lines within that space, and it's going to help to give shape to the leaves by utilizing that negative space, by building them out along the outside and creating that contrast along the outside of those leaves. Now with that layer complete, I picked up my hairdryer again and I'm going to be drying off my paper before I move on to the next step. It's very important that we have each one of our layers dry before, so that way our paper is ready to absorb and take in more of the water. If you do not let your layers dry completely, all of your colors are really going to run together and you're not going to get as clean of an effect of the layered look. All right, now that my picture is pretty well dry, I'm going to go in with my pencil once again and sketch out some more leaves and finding more spaces. And I can also go underneath the leaves that I have already painted and already have on my paper. And that's going to, again, create more of that layered look with that sketch there and adding more leaves into my paper. Now for this layer, I'm going to be working with darker paint again, because every single layer of our watercolor, we're going to go darker and darker in color. So I have picked up some orange within this layer, and I'll also be adding some more red within it too. And as we are doing this and building up that color, it's going to again create more depth. So the darker layers is going to look further away from the viewer, whereas the lighter ones are going to be closer. And remember, you're applying this layer of paint around all of your leaves that you have drawn. So even the leaves from the last layer, you're going to go around them even within this layer of paint. So you do kind of have to pay attention as far as where you have painted your leaves, where your sketches are, so that way you're not running into each other and you're not painting on the inside where it's actually supposed to be negative. So make sure that you're kind of just being mindful of that as you're creating, so that way you aren't putting paint anywhere that your leaves are, because we're painting around the outside of all of our leaves and giving it more of that depth and dimension. Now you will notice that with this project, that with each layer that you add, each layer of the leaves will be darker and darker and darker. And that's because the space around it, any of that negative space that we are filling up with the darker layer of color. And then whenever we go back in on top and we do a sketch over that darker layer, it's going to again make the leaf itself appear to be darker. And that is exactly what we're wanting. So we're wanting that first layer of those leaves to be our lightest leaves, to be that really pale light yellow color. And then as we build up the color, it's going to be to where the last layer of leaves are actually going to be more of a red color in tone. And so that's again going to help build that depth and that dimension to have the layered leaf look in our picture. Right, and with this layer done, I'm going to again grab my hair dryer, speed up that drying process just a bit, make sure that it's all dry. I can also just run my fingers on the top of the paper there to feel if it is still wet. If there's any areas that may be shiny or wet, I'm going to make sure that those get all completely dried. With the paper dry, I'm gonna add in some more leaves now to my paper. So this process and this picture is really a whole lot of repeating. You're going to be doing the same step, but just repeating it over and over. You're going to sketch in your leaves, and then you're going to pick up your paint and you're going to go and paint around all of your leaves. And with every layer of paint, make sure that you are getting darker colors. And one way that you can also achieve this, maybe if you don't have a whole lot of really dark colors, is by not applying very much water to your watercolor paints. Also, whenever you are wanting to get a little bit more detail and a little bit more control, the less water that you have in your paints is going to help you to be able to control your paints a little bit better. So I did switch out to my smaller brush, as you can see here, and that just is helping me to be able to fit into all of the smaller spaces around the leaves and get a little bit more of that detail built out. With this layer, I'm also adding a little bit of some brown paint as well, just to create some more depth and add another color variation within it. So if you want to add brown within this layer, I think that would be a really great idea. Ultimately, it's up to you. You can always do this project in a different color tone variation. You can change the colors completely within every single layer. If you wanted to do yellow tones on one layer, green on the next, blue on the next, purple on the next layer, you can always do that. And so that's something that you can definitely experiment with and keep creating this process to get a different effect. Even if you switch up the types of leaves that you do, that will also be a really cool way to change your picture and to create different variations of this project. And if you ever feel like your layer that you're working on doesn't have enough contrast from the previous layer of color, you can always build that up a little bit more. So this layer that I was working on, I felt like I needed to have it be a little bit darker because it felt still a little similar to the last layer of color. So I went in with a little bit darker of some reds to just kind of build up that color some more to create even more contrast. And I really like the way that that turned out. One of the really great things about creating with watercolor is it is very forgiving and you can always layer a lot of paint on whenever you are creating. So watercolors are built within layers, and that is wonderful because you can just change how your picture looks by adding another layer onto it. So I encourage you to layer some things on. Again, I'm adding some more brown within this layer and making sure to fill in all of those little nooks and crannies around the leaves that I have drawn. Every single one of those leaves that are there, I have to fill in all of the space that is around them. So layer up that color and make sure that you have enough contrast between your previous layer and your layer that you're currently working on with your watercolors. And once again, grabbing that hair dryer, drying it all off, making sure that it is completely dry before I go in here with the next layer. Now, once you are further within the process of this picture and you have a lot more leaves added to your picture here, you're going to have to get a little bit more creative on fitting your leaves in. One way that you can do this is by having your leaves go off of the page and then also having them go underneath your leaves that you have. So take your time on this step and really take a look at the leaves that you have, sketching underneath them and how those might flow together in your picture that you have. Now, as you start to paint around the outside of your leaves at this point, it is going to be a little bit more challenging because you have quite a few leaves here. So take your time and make sure that you are paying attention to where your leaves are at and the overlapping of all of your leaves together and how those go off of the page. You may want to switch to a smaller paintbrush if you have not already, just to make sure that you're getting into all of those little spaces and carving out all of those little leaves. For this layer, I'm working with a very deep maroon color, and I actually mixed this by taking the red that I used in the previous layer and mixed it with a really nice blue color to get like this really pretty purple deep maroon. And so I'm doing that deep and dark color for this layer along with some brown tones. So that will help to have the really dark contrast with this layer of the watercolor paints. Now you will need to take probably a little bit more time at this step because you do have so much overlapping and details going on. And with all of your leaves, it will take a little bit longer to get into all of the grooves of each one of those leaves. So depending on also the style of leaf that you have picked as well. If your leaf is rather simple in shape, it will not take as long to outline that and paint around it. But even with my leaf, even though it doesn't have really a whole lot of details, maybe like a maple leaf, it does still have quite a few stemming effects on it, and that did take quite a while to paint all around. So make sure that you're taking your time. Don't feel like you have to rush it. You can always pause the video if you need to. Now with this project, it is completely optional how many layers you want to add. I could have always gone in and added another layer of leaves if I wanted to the background, and I could have done a darker layer of paint by working with even a darker purple maroon color and maybe even adding some black paint in there as well, just to create even more depth and carve out those leaves even more. So it's totally up to you how many layers you want to do and how many leaves you want to add in your picture. But after you do have your layers, we're going to go in and we are going to add a little bit of detail to each one of our leaves. And this is going to be optional to you, and however much detail you add is going to be totally dependent upon you. So if you wanted to add a lot more detail and make them look a lot more realistic, you can do that. But for mine, I'm just doing a simple little brush stroke, and I'm using my smallest paintbrush to do that. And so I'm doing a simple brush stroke on the leaves, and then I'm going to add just a few of little veins on some of the leaves. I'm not going to add it onto all of them, but on a few of them I will. And I really like this extra added detail of adding just the few little vein strokes onto some of the leaves. I think it really just kind of pulled the picture together. And one idea that you could also do is the leaves that are more towards the front, which would be your lighter leaves, you could always add more detail to, and then the ones towards the back you could add less, as those leaves are technically further away or having the appearance of being further away. You wouldn't necessarily be able to see all of that detail that would be on them. So that is an idea if you do decide to have the leaf veining and detail added to your picture. Now with the painting of our picture complete, I'm going to once again grab the hairdryer and going to dry that completely. You can always just let it air dry at this point and come back to it the next day. But again, I wanted to see what it would look like now with it complete and to remove the tape. So once it is completely dry, we are going to take off the tape. So make sure that your picture is completely dry. If it is not and you try to remove the tape, you could have some of that water and the paint bleed out outside of the edges of your paper. All right, it's time for one of my favorite parts of every painting, and that is the tape pull. I always love pulling off that tape and seeing that nice crisp white line. I think it just frames a picture so nicely and just acts as a really nice little visual detail there to really frame your masterpiece that you made. So here is my masterpiece I made. I hope you enjoyed creating with me today. If you did, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up and go ahead and hit subscribe as well, so that way you have more easy art at home. So thank you so much for creating, and we will see you later. Stay colorful.